Chapter 11 Part B. "Are you out of your mind?" I asked her. "Gone," says Penelope. "Gone, nobody knows how. Come up and see." She dragged me after her into our young lady's sitting room, which opened into her bedroom. There, on the threshold of her bedroom door, stood Miss Rachel, almost as white in the face as the white dressing gown that clothed her. There also stood the two doors of the Indian cabinet, wide open. One of the drawers inside was pulled out as far as it would go. "Look," says Penelope. "I myself saw Miss Rachel put the diamond into the drawer last night. I went to the cabinet. The drawer was empty." "Is this true, miss?" I asked. With a look that was not like herself, with a voice that was not like her own, Miss Rachel answered as my daughter had answered. "The diamond is gone." Having said those words, she withdrew into her bedroom, and shut and locked the door. Before we knew which way to turn next, my lady came in, hearing my voice in her daughter's sitting room, and wondering what had happened. The news of the loss of the diamond seemed to petrify her. She went straight to Miss Rachel's bedroom, and insisted on being admitted. Miss Rachel let her in. The alarm, running through the house like fire, caught the two gentlemen next. Mr. Godfrey was the first to come out of his room. All he did when he heard what had happened was to hold up his hands in a state of bewilderment, which didn't say much for his natural strength of mind. Mr. Franklin, whose clear head I had confidently counted on to advise us, seemed to be as helpless as his cousin when he heard the news in his turn. For a wonder, he had had a good night's rest at last, and the unaccustomed luxury of sleep had, as he said himself, apparently stupefied him. However, when he had swallowed his cup of coffee, which he always took, on the foreign plan, some hours before he ate any breakfast, his brains brightened, the clear-headed side of him turned up, and he took the matter in hand, resolutely and cleverly, much as follows. He first sent for the servants, and told them to leave all the lower doors and windows, with the exception of the front door, which I had opened, exactly as they had been left when we locked up overnight. He next proposed to his cousin and to me to make quite sure, before we took any further steps, that the diamond had not accidentally dropped somewhere out of sight, say at the back of the cabinet, or down behind the table on which the cabinet stood. Having searched in both places, and found nothing, having also questioned Penelope, and discovered from her no more than the little she had already told me, Mr. Franklin suggested next extending our inquiries to Miss Rachel, and sent Penelope to knock at her bedroom door. My lady answered the knock, and closed the door behind her. The moment after we heard it locked inside by Miss Rachel. My mistress came out among us, looking sorely puzzled and distressed. "The loss of the diamond seems to have quite overwhelmed Rachel," she said, in reply to Mr. Franklin. "She shrinks, in the strangest manner, from speaking of it, even to me. It is impossible you can see her for the present." Having added to our perplexities by this account of Miss Rachel, my lady, after a little effort, recovered her usual composure, and acted with her usual decision. "I suppose there is no help for it?" she said, quietly. "I suppose I have no alternative but to send for the police?" "And the first thing for the police to do," added Mr. Franklin, catching her up, "is to lay hands on the Indian jugglers who performed here last night." My lady and Mr. Godfrey, not knowing what Mr. Franklin and I knew, both started, and both looked surprised. "I can't stop to explain myself now," Mr. Franklin went on. "I can only tell you that the Indians have certainly stolen the diamond. Give me a letter of introduction," says he, addressing my lady, to one of the magistrates at Frizinghall Hall, merely telling him that I represent your interests and wishes, and let me ride off with it instantly. Our chance of catching the thieves may depend on our not wasting one unnecessary minute. Nota bene, whether it was the French side or the English, the right side of Mr. Franklin seemed to be uppermost now. The only question was, how long would it last? He put pen, ink, and paper before his aunt, who, as it appeared to me, wrote the letter he wanted a little unwillingly. If it had been possible to overlook such an event as the loss of a jewel worth £20,000, I believe, with my lady's opinion of her late brother, and her distrust of his birthday gift, it would have been privately a relief to her to let the thieves get off with the Moonstone scot-free. I went out with Mr. Franklin to the stables, and took the opportunity of asking him how the Indians, whom I suspected, of course, as shrewdly as he did, could possibly have got into the house. One of them might have slipped into the hall, in the confusion, when the dinner company were going away, says Mr. Franklin. The fellow may have been under the sofa while my aunt and Rachel were talking about where the diamond was to be put for the night. He would only have to wait till the house was quiet, and there it would be in the cabinet, to be had for the taking. With those words, he called to the groom to open the gate, and galloped off. This seemed certainly to be the only rational explanation. But how had the thief contrived to make his escape from the house? I had found the front door locked and bolted, as I had left it at night, when I went to open it, after getting up. As for the other doors and windows, there they were still, all safe and fast, to speak for themselves. The dogs, too? Suppose the thief had got away by dropping from one of the upper windows, how had he escaped the dogs? Had he come provided for them with drugged meat? As the doubt crossed my mind, the dogs themselves came galloping at me round a corner, rolling each other over on the wet grass, in such lively health and spirits that it was with no small difficulty I brought them to reason, and chained them up again. The more I turned it over in my mind, the less satisfactory Mr. Franklin's explanation appeared to be. We had our breakfasts. Whatever happens in a house, robbery or murder, it doesn't matter, you must have your breakfast. When we had done, my lady sent for me, and I found myself compelled to tell her all that I had hitherto concealed, relating to the Indians and their plot. Being a woman of a high courage, she soon got over the first startling effect of what I had to communicate. Her mind seemed to be far more perturbed about her daughter than about the heathen rogues and their conspiracy. You know how odd Rachel is, and how differently she behaves sometimes from other girls, my lady said to me. But I have never, in all my experience, seen her so strange and so reserved as she is now. The loss of her jewel seems almost to have turned her brain. Who would have thought that horrible diamond could have laid such a hold on her in so short a time? It was certainly strange. Taking toys and trinkets in general, Miss Rachel was nothing like so mad after them as most young girls. Yet there she was, still locked up inconsolably in her bedroom. It is but fair to add that she was not the only one of us in the house who was thrown out of the regular groove. Mr. Godfrey, for instance, though professionally a sort of consoler general, seemed to be at a loss where to look for his own resources. Having no company to amuse him, and getting no chance of trying what his experience of women in distress could do towards comforting Miss Rachel, he wandered hither and thither about the house and gardens in a nameless uneasy way. He was in two different minds about what it became him to do, after the misfortune that had happened to us.